From Crisis in Spain to the Cry of Independence, 1808 to 1811, to understand Tomas Cipriano de Masquerra and the Nueva Granada he governed in 1845, you have to begin with the collapse of Spanish authority in 1808. That year, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain. King Charles IV of Spain abdicated, then his son Ferdinand VII of Spain was forced aside. Napoleon placed his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the throne. Across Spanish America, this created a constitutional crisis. If the legitimate king was captive, who held sovereignty? July 20th, 1810, the Grito de Independencia in Bogota, the most famous foundational political rupture in modern Colombian memory, occurred in Bogota on Friday, July 20th, 1810. The immediate trigger was the so-called Florero de Llorente incident. Patriot leaders sought to provoke a confrontation with Spanish merchant José González Llorente by requesting to borrow a flower vase for a civic dinner honoring Royal Commissioner Antonio Villavicencio. When conflict erupted, whether spontaneous or planned remains debated, it ignited public unrest in the city. Crowds gathered. Cabildo politics accelerated. By nightfall, local elites forced the creation of a governing junta. One slogan associated with the moment was, Viva el Rey, abajo el mal gobierno. Translation, long live the king, down with bad government. This reflected the transitional language of 1810. Many early revolutionaries still claimed loyalty to Ferdinand VII while rejecting peninsular control. The act of July 20th, the resulting act, created a local governing body in Bogota. It did not yet declare full independence in the modern sense. Instead, it asserted local sovereignty pending restoration of legitimate monarchy. This pattern repeated across Spanish America. Other provincial movements before and after Bogota. Cartagena formed a junta in May 1810. Socorro moved early against colonial authorities. Tunja organized autonomous institutions. Popayan remained more contested and royalist in orientation. Nueva Granada did not become one united revolutionary state in 1810. It fractured into competing provinces. Now let's look at this more closely. Volume 1, Collapse of Empire, The Road to Revolution in Nueva Granada, to understand why the events of July 20th, 1810 exploded in Santa Fe de Bogota, one must begin not in Colombia, but in Europe. The collapse of royal authority in Spain sent political shockwaves across the Atlantic. In the Spanish Empire, kingship was not symbolic decoration. It was the legal source of sovereignty, office, justice, taxation, and legitimacy. When the king vanished into captivity, the empire entered a constitutional vacuum. This was the world inherited by the inhabitants of the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada, a sprawling jurisdiction that included much of present-day Colombia, Panama, Ecuador, and Venezuela at various times of administrative reorganization. Its capital, Santa Fe de Bogota, sat high in the Andean plateau, cold, elevated, clerical, bureaucratic, and argumentative. By 1810, many Creole elites in Nueva Granada had grown restless. They were loyal subjects of the Spanish crown, but increasingly resentful of imperial administration. Most revolutionaries of this first stage did not begin as republicans. They began as men demanding autonomy, representation, and dignity. The Viceroyalty before crisis, the Viceroyalty of Nueva Granada, had first been created in 1717, suspended, then restored in 1739. Madrid hoped tighter control would increase tax revenue, curb smuggling, and strengthen defense against foreign rivals. The territory was difficult to govern. Mountains divided provinces from one another. Roads were primitive mule paths. River transport was slow and seasonal. Local loyalties were often stronger than loyalty to the capital. Regional elites in Cartagena, Popayan, Quito, Tunja, Antioquia, and other centers often distrusted Bogota. The colonial social hierarchy mattered deeply. Peninsulars, Spaniards born in Iberia, often favored for top offices. Criollos, American-born Spaniards of European descent, wealthy and educated but politically frustrated. Mestizos, indigenous peoples, free people of color, enslaved Africans, and many mixed communities formed the demographic majority in many regions. One persistent grievance among Criollos was exclusion from high office. Many believed they paid taxes, owned land, fought wars, and sustained local economies, Yet the most prestigious posts often went to recent arrivals from Spain. This grievance was not unique to Nueva Granada. It was spreading throughout Spanish America. Bourbon reforms and rising friction during the 18th century, the Bourbon monarchy attempted to modernize imperial administration. These reforms increased efficiency, but also resentment. Measures included new taxes, better customs enforcement, military reorganization, more centralized bureaucracy, replacement of local influence with crown appointees to imperial planners in Madrid. This was rational governance. To many colonial subjects, it looked like extraction. The memory of rebellion already existed. In 1781, the Comunero revolt erupted in Socorro and spread dramatically across Nueva Granada. Protesters opposed taxes and administrative abuses. Tens of thousands mobilized. Leaders included José Antonio Golan, who later became a symbol of popular resistance. Though the revolt was suppressed, it left a warning. Colonial order was less stable than it appeared. Golan was executed in 1782. His body was dismembered and displayed as a deterrent. The crown intended terror. It also created memory. Intellectual currents in Santa Fe. By the late 18th century, Santa Fe had become more intellectually active than outsiders assumed. Printing presses, universities, legal circles, and salons circulated ideas from scholastic constitutional thought, Enlightenment, science, political economy, natural rights, debates, news from the American and French revolutions, yet this should not be overstated. Nueva Granada was not full of Jacobins reading Rousseau in every tavern. Many elites remained devout Catholics and monarchists, but they increasingly believed that law, representation, and civic virtue mattered. A key figure was Antonio Nariño. In 1794, Nariño translated and printed the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen in Spanish. This was explosive. Authorities prosecuted him. He was imprisoned and persecuted. His case became famous. Even those who disliked his radicalism saw evidence that imperial censorship feared ideas. Science, prestige, and American identity. Another influential figure was José Celestino Mutis, leader of the Royal Botanical Expedition. Mutis and his circle cultivated science, mapping, botany, illustration, and learned correspondence. Among his associates and students were Creole intellectuals who increasingly valued American knowledge and local talent. A subtle shift occurred. People born in the Americas began to think of themselves not merely as provincial Spaniards, but as custodians of distinct societies with their own capacities. That did not automatically mean independence, but it prepared minds for it. The European earthquake. Napoleon invades Spain in 1808. Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte intervened in the Spanish monarchy. King Charles IV of Spain abdicated amid scandal and pressure. His son Ferdinand VII of Spain also abdicated under French manipulation at Bayonne. Napoleon then placed his brother Joseph Bonaparte on the Spanish throne. To Spaniards, this was dynastic theft. Across Spain, local juntas formed claiming to govern in the absent king's name. Resistance to France became both patriotic war and constitutional improvisation. This mattered enormously in America. If sovereignty came from the king and the king was captive, who governed overseas dominions? Madrid no longer had a clear answer. The crisis of legitimacy reaches America. Spanish-American elites argued, if Spain can create local juntas to preserve the monarchy in emergency, why cannot American kingdoms and provinces do the same? This was not a fringe argument. It relied on older legal traditions that sovereignty could revert to the people, municipalities, or corporate bodies when the monarch was incapacitated. Many Americans insisted they were not colonies, but constituent kingdoms of the Spanish monarchy. That distinction was politically explosive, because if they were kingdoms, then they possessed rights. Tension in Santa Fe. Viceroy Amar y Bourbon. The viceroy in Santa Fe was Antonio José Amar y Bourbon, an aging military officer. He was cautious, conservative, and increasingly mistrusted. His wife, Francisca Villanova, became a subject of rumor and resentment in elite gossip. Enemies accused the viceregal household of favoritism, arrogance, and detachment. Some of this was unfair. Some was political weaponry. But perception matters in pre-revolutionary cities. Santa Fe's Creole elites complained that the viceroy more to peninsular advisors than to local notables. News from Quito and Caracas events elsewhere accelerated unrest. Quito, 1809. In August 1809, Quito formed a junta claiming loyalty to Ferdinand VII while asserting local authority. Spanish officials later crushed it violently. The repression shocked neighboring regions. Caracas, April 19, 1810. Caracas deposed Captain General Vicente Empren and formed its own junta. When word reached Nueva Granada, it was electrifying. If Caracas could act, why not Santa Fe? Antonio Villavicencio and the gathering storm. A crucial but often underappreciated figure was Antonio Villavicencio. Villavicencio had been appointed as royal commissioner and carried prestige. Many Creoles hoped he would support reforms or at least mediate between Americans and imperial officials. His expected arrival in Santa Fe intensified political maneuvering. Reformers believed the moment had come to press demands. Royal authorities feared exactly that. Santa Fe in daily life, a city ready to ignite Santa Fe around 1810, was not a giant metropolis. It was a compact administrative capital of churches, convents, plazas, colleges, workshops, and official buildings. But beneath its formal exterior, families feuded politically, lawyers drafted memoranda, students spread gossip, militia officers calculated loyalties, merchants worried about trade disruption, clerics debated obedience, and justice. Coffeehouse culture was limited compared with Europe, but conversation culture was intense. People knew each other's business. A careless remark could become tomorrow's political crisis. The language of loyalty and the language of power. It is essential to understand that many future revolutionaries still proclaimed loyalty to Ferdinand VII in 1810. Why? Because open independence was dangerous, divisive, and perhaps premature. Invoking the captive king allowed reformers to challenge local officials, claim legitimacy, avoid charges of treason, unite moderates and radicals temporarily. Thus, the first revolutionary language was often conservative in form, revolutionary in consequence. Key personalities waiting in the wings. Several men soon central to events were already active. Camilo Torres Tenorio, brilliant lawyer, advocate of Creole rights. José Acevedo y Gómez, famed speaker, politically bold. Jorge Tadeo Lozano, aristocratic intellectual. Francisco José de Caldes, scientist, engineer, future martyr. Antonio Morales Galaves, organizer in the capital. Antonio Nariño, controversial veteran radical, watched carefully. These men did not agree on everything. Some distrusted one another, but many agreed the old order was failing. Trivia: why a flower vase became famous. The famous flower vase incident of July 20th did not emerge from nowhere. Political conspirators needed a public confrontation, a symbolic insult, crowd mobilization, a trigger that looked spontaneous. The merchant chosen, José González Llorente, had a reputation among some locals for haughtiness. Whether deserved or exaggerated, that reputation made him useful. The vase story would become patriotic legend. Reality was more calculated. We will reconstruct it in the next volume. A warning from Camilo Torres in 1809. Camilo Torres Tenorio wrote the Memorial de Agravios, protesting discrimination against American-born Spaniards. Though not published officially at the time, it became a landmark text. Torres argued for equality within the monarchy, not immediate separation. Its spirit can be summarized: Americans were loyal, but loyalty without rights was untenable. That was the constitutional road to rupture. While revolution became possible in 1810, by mid-1810, several pressures converged. Spain's monarchy had collapsed into uncertainty. Local elites wanted power and recognition. Earlier rebellions showed resistance was possible. Other cities had formed juntas. The viceroy lacked trust. Political organizers were ready. Public theater could transform grievance into action. Empires often look strongest just before they fracture. Closing scene in July 1810. Santa Fe was tense, rumor-filled, expectant. Officials believed they could contain agitation. Conspirators believed a decisive gesture could awaken the city. Merchants opened shops. Clerks copied documents. Priests said Massachusetts soldiers stood watch. And somewhere in town sat an ordinary household object that would become immortal: a borrowed flower vase. In the next lecture, we will cover the Grito de Independencia with an hour-by-hour reconstruction of that day, who planned the provocation, what happened at Llorente's shop, what Jose Azavado, why Gomez really said, how the crowd was managed, why the viceroy hesitated, how myth differs from evidence, who gained power by nightfall.